All right, we have laid out general broad strokes of what traditionalism is. We have laid out this notion of no linear time, but a cycle from a golden age to a silver age to a bronze age to a dark period and a cataclysmic event, which represents the total homogenization of the world, the destruction of the class system, the devaluation of the warrior and the priest, the loss of the spiritual, no spiritual connection, no upward glances to the sky, focus on the ground, materialism. Sounds familiar as to where we are right now in parts of the United States. So that's traditionalism. How does Bannon get involved with this? How does he find this in his life? Why does he bring this into politics? Like, let's sort of animate the Bannon character in this story now.
Yeah. So I think you could describe it as being rooted, and this is how he opened up when I asked him to tell me about it. He said that as a youth, as a teenager in Richmond, Virginia, he was raised Catholic, but he didn't think that the Catholic Church had a vibrant spirituality to it. And when he gets to college, as did a lot of people in this age, I mean, we're talking, 70s here, a lot of especially young white men got really into Buddhism. Especially a lot of young white Jewish men, as in particular, the Jew booze is a phenomenon unto itself. But Bannon, he gets into Buddhism. He continues this interest. He continues it more or less in secret as well throughout his years in the Navy, when he really becomes a kind of a hardcore dude, conservative, especially on the outside guy. He's very, very interested in spirituality. One thing that I actually had my research assistants help me with is I talked to him about his years in the Navy when he would travel around to different seaports, and he would just start name dropping in the cities where his destroyer was docked, the names of the local metaphysical New Age bookstores with the incense and the crystals and all that stuff. And he knew the names of all of them. And we went through and we found where they were. We found what they were called. I mean, so anywhere he was going, he had a mental map of how to get to the nearest, place to buy a book and cleanse his chakra and everything. And so he's continuing to do this. And somewhere in that time, he never was able to give me a firm date on it. He encounters the writings of an author named René Gonon, who really is the original traditionalist. Some traditionalists would question that, just because they think traditionalism is true. But the person who really codifies this system, that's René Gonon. It's definitely not political, but very deep, very hard to read, extremely difficult to get through his text. But Bannon is captivated by them. He's also interested, it's not just traditionalism, he's interested in all types of alternative spirituality. So he's reading Madame Blavatsky, who becomes this sort of matriarch for the New Age movement. He becomes very interested in a figure named Gurdjieff, who is more mainstream, but not much. He's read by a lot of Hollywood executives and producers who want to find themselves. Let's say this is big in the 1980s and 1990s. And it's not just that he's reading these books. Bannon reads a lot. He can really name drop titles and authors like basically no one else I've ever met. But by the time we get to the 1990s, he starts associating with other people, especially who are into Gurdjieff. And he's living in California, and he's flying people to his house. He's rich. He's flying up to San Francisco and spending time with Jacob Needleman. So it's in this period of time where he is consuming this broad field of writing, the alternative spirituality. He remains a Catholic, yes, and he's always been been keen to reassert that to me. But he's doing a lot of things that I think more doctrinaire Catholics would not be too into, and consuming a lot of religious texts, and also opening himself up to the idea that Catholicism is really a pathway to something else, something bigger. And even Christianity might be a pathway to something else and something bigger. And it's important to note, especially for people who, for various reasons, think that Bannon is a pure phony. And there are reasons there. He can be a blowhard and bloviate. his interest in alternative spirituality and eventually traditionalism, it predates so much of everything else that we know him for. So it has been constant, whereas a lot of other aspects of his life could appear dilettantish and capricious. Anyway, so he is reading this, associating with people in the 1990s based on his interest in these thinkers. And when sometime after he becomes interested in politics, then he encounters Julius Evola, who's this figure who brought traditionalism and right-wing politics, anti-liberal politics together. And that was a revolution for him. He said that was what, brought that old interest in his burgeoning political interest together. And again, over time, we see that this is not just a book that you read. I read lots of books and different authors. It doesn't necessarily mean anything about my identity or my plans, but he eventually starts to associate with people on the basis of their interest in Julius Evola. So this is not a casual interest.
Fascinating. So he has a lifelong interest in alternative spirituality. He's like a truth seeker, trying to find himself, reading weird books in weird places all around the world, being transported by the Navy all around the world to pick up these crazy books and learn about a whole new way of thinking that he carries with him through his whole life. And what I'm really want us to sort of nail down here is, if Bannon is a traditional, would he say I'm a traditionalist?
With qualification, yes. He would say I'm a traditionalist in this sense. He was always eager to distance himself from Julius Evola's race theories, for example.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, there's a lot of shady characters in this field here, even though some of it strikes me as actually being pretty reasonable, but some of it strikes me as being pretty out there and probably not so good for everyone. And this is really the crux of the question here is, what does Bannon see as his role in the life cycle? What does Bannon see as Trump's role in the life cycle? If Bannon believes in traditionalism means that there's a homogeneity, I didn't say that right, and a loss of the spiritual and a focus on the materialism, and others, we haven't talked about Dugan just yet, but Dugan points out in particular that American universalism is the mechanism by which a lot of this sort of destruction is happening. How does one hold those views in their head and then become the campaign manager and top advisor to the leader of the free world and the Western world of liberal values and liberal universalism and exporters of cultural homogenization, etc.? How do we square all of that, Ben?
I'm going to take it in reverse order in the way that you laid it out. All right,
however you'd like.
Let's start with Trump, because the question of America is much thornier. So in passing, in one interview, Steve said to me, Donald Trump is a man in time. And he just went on. And I didn't say anything. We were talking about something else. He's extremely hard to interview. He's unbelievably hard to interview. That's true on TV, but when you get into this stuff, it's impossible. And so he says Trump's a man in time. And okay. Does he know that? Is that a common phrase? I'm talking to my friends and family about that. Later on, he says to me, the importance of Donald Trump is that he has the will and the ability to destroy and disassemble and disrupt. And he does not need to understand his role in history. I'm paraphrasing now, but that's the quote is in the book. But that he said specifically, we were talking about time cycles. Donald Trump does not need to understand time cycles or anything of the nature. To me, that wrapped up the question in some way, whether or not. Bannon never said, I read Savitri Devi. That would be worse than reading Julius Evola. That would be a bigger scandal if anyone is paying attention and is knowledgeable. But he laid everything out for me essentially to say that he sees Trump as playing this role. It's not just in the abstract sense that he wants Trump to be the person who carries society across the 0 point from dark into golden by virtue of disassembly and destruction. But he even used some terminology that illuminates the origin of it, calling him a man in time. So that's what Trump's role is, and it's not that mystified for Bannon. It is the disassembly of the administrative state in the United States. It is the disassembly of this amorphous globalist state that, as he sees it, which America plays a role, even if he doesn't think it's its centerpiece. And I mean, Trump was doing what Bannon was wanting to do in Europe ahead of that time with the European Union vote and Brexit, to see that mass entity shattered into smaller pieces, where you would see differentiation and borders resurface, where instead society had been working towards erasing them. So that was Trump's role, and the conversation that he and I had then was, okay, so you, Steve Bannon, you are aware of the time cycles, you are enlightened, but you have chosen not to pull yourself out like a man above time. You are not a monk, right? Or an ascetic living hidden in the cliffs of the hillside. You are working to bring about this particular change. So what does that make you? And brought up the Devi's typology, the laid out the existence of a man against time. And when I said that, it was one of few times when he was quiet in our interviews, where he really didn't say much. But of course, someone who's working to disassemble and who sees a historic purpose for it is the lightning and the sun as a man against time. That's where he would fit into this way of thinking. But he didn't say it to me. He was quiet.
I'm going to take a pregnant pause there just for dramatic effect. Fascinating. Do you think, your opinion, do you think Steve Bannon specifically sees himself as the lightning and the sun with a mission?
Yes.
That's heavy, dude.
If you want a straight answer, that doesn't mean, of course, that he fills those categories with the same meaning that Savitri Devi does or Julius Evola does.
True. Very well qualified, Ben. Thank you.
But this is a guy who has an account of history and an analysis of geopolitics that yearns for disassembly of the mass entities, and thinks that doing so also has a role to play in the revitalization of spirituality, in sovereignty, and in returning to an order and a state of affairs that he considers to be more virtuous. But you get there by destruction, by shattering the edifices. That's how I'm thinking, just to let you into my reason and why I answer your question in the affirmative.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I asked the question, because I had the same feeling and the same notion, and it makes sense, and it maps onto everything we're talking about. It maps on even to his political activities. It maps onto the early advice that Bannon gave Trump in terms of the cabinet and the people that he chose to run the administration and the executive branch and the various department heads. State Department, they came in and started tearing things up. Betsy DeVos is coming in, trying to break up school unions and advocate for school choice. The list goes on, as you elucidate in the book. And interesting side note, and I don't have a strong point on this, but I did talk to Amanda Milius, who was a Trump political appointee at State, and I asked her, did you feel like in the beginning days that they were actually trying to dismantle the State Department? And she didn't really have, and no slight on her, she didn't really have a direct response to that. But I am beginning, I'm trying to ask people that question as we go through this process, just interviewing folks and debriefing, hopefully preparing. And from my perspective, I don't know about yours, hopefully preparing for 4 more years, or an off chance debriefing. And post-morteming the last 4 years. This conversation about Trump being man in time, unawareness, of his role in the this gold into silver to bronze to the dark in return. That and then Bannon's use of Trump to advance that timeline, that jives with another theory and framework that I've worked with to analyze the Trump phenomenon, in that the people that voted for Donald Trump, myself included, wanted to launch a weapon at the Uniparty, the hegemony of the Democratic and GOP establishment, sort of stranglehold on politics and law, along with the corporations and the financial class. Donald Trump to us was seen as a tool, as a weapon launched by an insurgency, a networked insurgency, that emerged out of our, ultra connected social media environments. And we basically, like, have you ever been to a mosh pit and there's like a girl in the mosh pit and she needs to get out and the crowd just kind of like pushes her up onto the top and then shoves her up onto the stage and then they can, so that she can get out. That's kind of like what Trump was. I mean, he wanted to run for president, obviously, for many years, but like the network coalesced around him, pushed him up, and just threw him up there as a weapon, as a way to disrupt, right? As a way to disrupt what we see as the collusion between the Dems and the GOP, the corporations, the sellouts of the moneyed interests, the devotion to globalism, neoliberal, neocon, foreign policy, wars, WTO, global trade, the whole thing, this homogeneity, right? This exported American homogeneity. We wanted to destroy all of that by throwing Donald Trump up there.